Hi, so the question is, does the personal identity of an individual persist through change? So the first question I want to ask is related to bioethic literature, which is discussed in terms of personal identity. So if a person is altered through bioenhancement, so cosmetic surgery, for example, would it alter their personal identity as well? Walter Glennon suggests that genetic modifications do change a person's identity and that the body or mind alters, therefore, identity alters. It's important to know also that cosmetic surgery is not the only bioenhancement, that there is also moral bioenhancement that has just been discussed, which makes a person more empathetic, fair, and reasonable. So this might change a person's personal identity even more. So alternatively, if the genetics were modified, yet the person is still able to recall themselves before they were modified, this would mean the personal identity remains. So as an adult, you had a bioenhancement, and you still remember your early stages in life, such as the toddler stage, childhood, and teenage as a teenager. So this would mean that your personal identity remains because you still remember your consciousness in those 3 stages of your life, despite having a bioenhancement. But if the modification happened at an early fetus stage, the person cannot recall their identity as a fetus, therefore their personal identity alters. So the first theory that was formulated was the body theory, which is the personal identity persists through life as you remain in the same body from birth to death. There is criticism of this theory, though, that says the thoughts and identity formulated are completely different to the future stages in life. And also that you do not consist of identical material you had when you were born. So for example, keratin growth, when you were born, you don't have hair, nails, or skin. But as you grow older, it grows more and more, and you get that keratin growth. So that means that your body is not identical and is not comprised of identical material from birth to death. So John Locke wrote an essay called In an Essay Concerning Humane Understanding, chapter of Identity and Diversity. He attempts to describe what a person is, or establish what a person is, and he comes up with an intelligent being with logic, reasoning, reflective skills, so to think of oneself and identity as it alters, and one that is capable of scientific thinking, establishing order and law. He also says that the consciousness and thinking are always interconnected as it creates the self, thus consciousness is what defines identity, and this is very important. There are multiple topics he talks about. This one is more direct, so personal identity and change of substance. He questions, does a person's identity persist based on changing substances, which is very similar to the question we are attempting to answer. And he says that we see the substance alter without the change of personal identity. So this means the person is the same, but the identity changes. We see this evidence in our bodies that feel sensation when touched, where if a person cuts their hand off, the hand is separated from their consciousness. Therefore, it is not a part of their identity anymore. So John Locke was a philosopher, and he was most well known for the personal identity, defining personal identity. So he summarized personal identity as psychological growth based on consciousness and is not based off soul or body. He was heavily against the Cartesian theory. And he coins the memory theory, which is that identity persists as memories of your past remain, and each of those memories are connected to the one prior. He gives the example Prince and the Cobbler. Solves the problem of resurrection. So the story goes, the prince's soul is transferred from the prince's body to the cobbler's body. So that means the cobbler's soul has left. The prince still views himself as the prince, although he is in a new body, because his mind still contains the memories and his consciousness from his past self and his connected memories, which means that he is still himself and he still identifies as himself, whether or not he's in a different body. So this creates a distinction between man and person, in an unconscious state and only the conscious state. So why Locke's theory makes sense? There is more to personal identity than the physical body we are in. So all your memories from the past and the memories connected that came before are part of your personal identity, even more so than your body. And as humans, we are self-reflective beings, so remembering the past event is in our nature. We tend to think of ways that a moment could have been different, or if what we did was justified or not, all of which allow us to reflect and alter or establish ways of thinking, thus shaping our own personal identity. So there is criticism of Locke's theory, though, and the two terms that are thrown around a lot is that it's circular and illogical. So consciousness is ever-changing, but identity is established. The memory is also sometimes unreliable, so we fall victim to delusions. And philosophers say that authentic memories are what define personal identity. So the problem in this is that it is circular, which means that genuine memories form personal identity, but personal identity doesn't necessarily form solely through genuine memories. So an example in a video by Live Noggin states that a study conducted in the 2000s showed subjects for photos, and 3 of those photos were real events that happened to the subject. One of them was false and doctored. So they were made to review this, and the end result, 50% of them claimed that this memory of the false image was real, and they came up with detailed explanations of it. So this shows that both genuine memories and delusions make your personal identity, and it's defined by yourself. So Maria Shetman is a specific philosopher that criticizes Locke's theory. So she states the issue of personal identity is an important role in bioethical discourse, and that mentions other more extensive interpretations of personal identity and how it is different from Locke's. So she poses that it involves psychological connections as well as memory. The connections must be appropriately caused, and that overlapping chains of connections are more valid and not direct ones. So she also questions the value of the sameness of consciousness concept, which implicates that if one were to forget they committed murder, they did not commit that murder. Or if a person claims they remember leading troops at Waterloo, they were Napoleon. There's a problem with delusion that I stated in this slideshow. But then there's key terms. The memory criterion is a person who is brain dead would be considered non-existent as they cannot remember anything. An identity crisis occurs when one is not confident in who they are as a person. Personal essentialism is a person is the same at every time they exist. A quasi-memory is appropriately caused recollections of experiences. It does not require identity and is not circular. The non-identity problem is even though an act is not deemed wrong, it may still be wrong. Past and present theories. So a past theory asks more philosophical questions. So who are we? Is there life after death? The modern theory poses 2 problems: the diachronic problem, which is identity of a person over time, and a synchronic problem, which attributes that characterize a person at a specific time. So my conclusion of this is that the 2 primary theories, mind and body theory, are both fundamentally correct. Although your present body may not hold identical material to when you were a fetus, we all remain in the same body throughout life and death, meaning the physical part of our identity persists through change. However, personal identity is much more than the physical attributes we hold. Personal identity is predominantly in relation to the mind, as it is what makes us human. With our minds, we are able to self-reflect while remembering past experiences, which ultimately shapes our perception of ourselves and therefore our personal identity. I do not agree entirely with Locke's theories, as it is more so about the consciousness which changes from moment to moment. However, interpreting his theory into a more flexible thought, such as the explanation above, is how I would view the answer to this question. Moreover, personal identity is something that you cultivate from yourself. So foreign perspectives on how one determines personal identity does not hold as much validity compared to your own view. Similarly, the sameness of conscious concept implies that even though a memory may be untrue or belong to another person, a person that remembers that memory can claim that as their personal identity. The example that if person A were to forget they committed murder, it would mean they did not commit murder is valid to person A, who forgot, but not to person B, who does remember the murderer. To person A, they truly did not commit the murder, and so their personal identity is formed in that way. Alternatively, person B remembers what act person A committed, and so believes what person A's identity is of a murder. In this situation, both parties' views of person A's personal identity are correct, as A genuinely believes they did not commit the murder, although it is a delusion, and B firmly believes A did commit the murder, and this is a truth. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.